Hi, I'm Ruth Hoyt, and I am going to be presenting the TexNEP program tonight. And so I'm going to talk about mastering the art of wildlife photography with a little bit of humor injected here and there. My name is Ruth Hoyt, and I am the founder of TexNEP, the Texas Nature and Environmental Photographers, and I do speaking engagements. And as I said before, this one is a new program that I debuted last weekend up in Georgetown, Texas for the Texas Photography Festival. So I'd like you to meet your instructors, Mr. Cardinal and Mr. Green Jay. Seriously, here are a few examples of my photography. I like to try and put new pictures in that some of you have not seen before. You may have seen some, you may have not, but hopefully you'll see at least a few new ones. These are some of the photos that I've taken in the past. Some of them are favorites, and some of them are ones that I've just not ever displayed before. So these are all, most of these photos are taken at the Laguna Seca Ranch in South Texas, but there are others as well, and I'll note those as I can. Some of them are just very serendipitous, and that is one of them, the woodpecker with the bee flying by, and it caught her attention. Javelina and its baby. This one is from Costa Rica. When I go to Costa Rica twice a year, we always do the green, red-eyed tree frogs. This one's a blue jeans frog. There's Mr. Green Jay. He's telling me that I need to move on. So tonight I'm going to discuss 10 major points. And if you're at home, you can take a screenshot or a cell phone picture and come back to it later, or just wait to watch for the recording. We're going to have that posted on my YouTube channel in a few days. So tonight I'm going to talk about 10 major points. The first 5 have to do with ethical techniques and practices, learning animal behavior, choosing the right equipment, mastering camera settings, and using natural and available light. Mr. Cardinal's checking out what I have set up for the birds to land on. To continue, we're going to talk about learning about composition, practicing stealth and camouflage, post-processing techniques, education and conservation, and last but not least, ethical considerations in sharing. And when I say sharing, I'm talking about posting on social media or publicly. So Ms. Cardinal is checking my exposure right there. So let's talk about ethical techniques and practices. Most of the time, I'm going to just have photos to go along with my talking points. But on this one, I wanted to say that we should follow guidelines outlined by organizations such as the National Audubon Society or the North American Nature Photography Association. So I don't have pictures for those, but I do have their websites and their logos. And you probably have seen these before, and you can recognize them, but they do have ethical guidelines to follow when you're photographing. And so as far as ethical techniques and practices, you don't want to disturb or disrupt your wildlife's natural activities. So you want to avoid baiting or luring animals with food that would alter their behavior. And I will talk about that because I do work on ranches, and we do feed. We put out feed for the animals, but we put them at watering holes and places where they're going anyway. And it's not any different than if you put a hummingbird feeder at your backyard. You put out a hummingbird feeder, the birds come to your hummingbird feeders and they eat from that. You're giving them food. Now, we do take pictures, of course, when we are at the ranch. So you're going to see different animals that you would see at the ranch. You saw a deer just now. It had come to the water and was drinking. This northern bobwhite male, part of the quail family, has 3 of his chicks here drinking at the water and giving us a reflection. Got a meadowlark taking a bath. The animals do come to the water, and we take advantage of the opportunities. We're in photo blinds, we're covered up, and they don't see us. This is one of my favorite pictures of a green jay. They're very secretive about what they look like. They don't ever want to look like they're not ready for public. And so this guy has just dunked under the water, taken a dip and stood straight up. And I captured that photo before he flew away. Normally they come up, they come out of the water and they fly away and they go off into the brush to dry off and preen and look presentable again. But I captured him in that moment. So about learning animal behavior, you want to know about your subject before you photograph it if possible. And so I suggest reading and learning about your subject and studying it before you go out so you can anticipate the behaviors and capture authentic moments. I do talk about behavior in my classes and workshops. And when I take people to the ranches and photo blinds, I talk about the animals and the different things that they do. This picture was taken on the Bolivar Flats outside of Galveston, and it's the white morph of the reddish egret. And what I knew about them before I took this picture was that if there was going to be a reddish egret come out and be around, it wasn't going to tolerate the white morph. For some reason, the reddish egrets do not like the white morph of the reddish egret. So this is a reddish egret, but it's a white morph, and he is going to be chased. And so I didn't look at the other egret, the other reddish egret, because I knew he would be the one chasing the white morph. So that's how I knew to get this picture to be on this bird. So as soon as it started taking off, I was ready to get that picture. Okay, whooping cranes. Everybody loves the whooping cranes. We go up to Rockport and Port Aransas and different places to see the whooping cranes. They migrate. And I just put this picture in because this is the time of the year that we see the whooping cranes, not so much down here in the valley. We have to go a couple of hours north to get them. But I put that in as a reminder to know where your subject is. If you expect to see a whooping crane down here, you're going to be disappointed because they aren't here. So if you want to photograph them, you learn that you have to go where they do. And in the wintertime, we can get them up in Rockport, Port Aransas, in that area. They go north in the spring. Okay, this is a barn owl photo that I took on the Laguna Seca Ranch. They come out in the evening. They sleep all day and they come out in the early evening, late afternoon, early evening. And if you know where they roost, you just have to wait. Sit there quietly and wait, and you can get a picture like this. This happens to be at the raptor blind at the Laguna Seca Ranch, and the scissortail flycatchers are here. We're in March right now. They came just a couple of weeks ago. People have been seeing them. They're on the ranches now, and what they start doing is courting and nesting. And so this is a picture not from this year, but from prior years. And the scissortail flycatchers like to come to the raptor area because it's a big open field. There's lots of insects, and so it makes good habitat for them. So they find little twigs and branches, and they hunt for bugs while they're in between nest building. And the thing about it is they're at the raptor blind, and at the raptor blind, we have crested caracaras, turkey vultures, black vultures, and Harris's hawks. Those are the usual four. Sometimes we get a few other things like kestrels and an occasional red-tailed hawk. But anyway, those are predators, and they like to eat scissortail flycatcher babies, scissortail flycatcher eggs. They like to find that for food. And so the scissortails don't care for the raptors. And if they are looking for bugs, hawking insects on the fly, and they see a raptor coming through and it's too close to where they're nesting, they're going to take chase. And this is what happens. They will chase a caracara. This is a juvenile caracara that just happened to be flying towards the raptor blind. And this scissortail flycatcher saw him and took pursuit. And so it was lucky for me that the caracara was flying straight towards the raptor blind, or I wouldn't have had that angle with both birds in sharp focus too. Green jays feeding each other. I've only seen this a few times. And so I was really lucky to get this. The female will sometimes just make little noises, nothing like the big bold green jays that we hear all the time. And what she's doing is she'll fluff out and just sort of look helpless. And what she's hoping is that the male will come along and feed her and show her that he could be a good dad for her chicks. So this is courtship behavior. This picture was taken in Costa Rica, and I put this in just to remind to watch for stretching. When birds stretch, they're usually getting ready to fly. So I'm always looking for birds that are stretching. There's a yellow-billed cuckoo. That's the only picture of a yellow-billed cuckoo that I have stretching. So learning animal behavior continued. You want to be patient and be observant. You want to allow wildlife to become comfortable with your presence. And yes, they sense you are there. And if you chase, they will flee. So this one just was another one of those serendipitous shots. I happened to be below ground with my lens right at ground level at the raptor blind. And this caracara was limping. He was walking with a limp. I thought, why is he limping? He looks healthy. He doesn't look like he's got anything wrong. Well, soon enough, he bent over, and I don't know if I can zoom this in, but if you look in his beak, he has picked a grass burr out of his toe. That was what was making him limp. And if you've ever had a grass burr on you, you will limp. There's a javelina, and it's smelling something it had never smelled before. And so I was ready because I knew if a javelina came in, that they're always scenting the air. And this one was smelling something up in the air and gave me this, I think it's a great pose. It's just so different. It looks like a little ballerina, but sort of chubby. This story, this bird has a story. It's a chestnut-sided warbler. And I've put that on my business card because it was a real meaningful story for me that unfolded here. I was down at South Padre Island, and it was during migration. There was a fallout of birds, and there were birds everywhere, photographers everywhere, people everywhere. And I happened to see this little chestnut-sided warbler fly into the bush way down, maybe like at knee level. It was very low to the ground. And all the photographers were all standing and looking at all the birds up in the air and up in the trees above where we were standing. So most people were looking like this, but I just happened to see the movement of that little chestnut-sided warbler coming into that brush. And so without saying anything, I just sort of lowered my tripod. I loosened the legs and just let it slide down and down. And I took pictures, even though I was above him. I didn't like that because there was all kinds of stuff in the way. But I was taking insurance shots, and I just got lower and lower and lower. And at one point I was on my knees, and the tripod was just still a little bit too high. I took a picture, and then I lowered it more, and I finally splayed the legs out completely flat. And so my camera was aimed upwards at this little bird. And at that moment, he looked at me, and the wind came from behind him and puffed him out like that. So that was one of those things that just happened. It was magical. It was a moment that I couldn't have planned. I just took advantage of the opportunity that I saw. Like I said, chase them and they will flee. If you start going after a bird or any kind of wildlife, it's going to run. It's going to leave. Choosing the right equipment. So I guess my story, I've been teaching photography for 30 some odd years now. I'm getting sort of old, but I started out in Nikon back in the days of film when there wasn't autofocus. There weren't a lot of auto anything. And so I started with Nikon. And when I moved to Texas back in January of 2000, Canon had just come out with the image stabilized 100 to 400 millimeter lens. And I just was so taken by that. And I went ahead and bought a camera body and the 100 to 400. I still kept all my Nikon equipment because that's what I knew. That's what I grew up on photography using. And that was my main equipment. but I bought this Canon, I don't even remember what model it was, but I put the 100 to 400 with it. And of course, this was still film, but it was amazing that there was image stabilization. And the first time I looked through the camera using that lens, I pressed the shutter partway down and I could hear the little gyroscope going around and around. And as I stood there looking through there, the picture was going around and around because I was moving, and the gyroscope was stabilizing it. And so that was new technology for me. And it took a while to get used to it because it's just different. But anyway, so I had my Nikon, I had my Canon, and I sort of called myself ambidextrous because sometimes I'd be using one and sometimes I'd be using the other, and everything was backwards from one to the other. And it would be confusing sometimes because you have to think the lens focuses this way, or you put the lens on this way or that way. Everything, even the lens caps were reversed from each other. So I eventually bought more Canon equipment. And in the meantime, I also had Hasselblad. So I had 3 different systems that I was using. And anyway, recently, just a little bit over a year ago, I bought an Olympus camera. So I've been working on Olympus. And so my points about choosing the right equipment is that you should use equipment that's meant for wildlife. If you're going to do wildlife, you need a sturdy tripod, a modern camera with fast autofocus and tracking, a silent shutter preferably, and a fast telephoto lens. And that's where I migrated when I went from the Nikon to the Canon, and then to the Canon DSLRs, and then the Olympus. So I have gone to a lighter tripod. It's quite light, and I'm still not sure I'm sold on this, but I think I am. I have a Peak Design tripod, and I use the Flex Shooter Pro head. And so that's my support system. It's much lighter than what I used to use. I have my OM1 camera. They've recently come out with the Mark II. I haven't ordered one yet. I say yet, I don't know if I will. Probably someday, maybe, I don't know. But anyway, with that, I have the 150 to 400 millimeter lens. And because the OM1 is a micro four thirds camera, it has a 2x crop factor in it. So your 150 to 400 millimeter is actually effectively 300 to 800 millimeters, and it has a built-in extender that makes the 800 out to 1,000. So it's quite a great range. So it's basically effectively 300 to 1,000 millimeters. And that's what it looks like when it's put together. And the bonus for that is that the 150 to 400 millimeter lens is waterproof. So when it's raining, it's been raining this week. We had sunshine today, this afternoon finally. But this week when the rain was getting on it, I just didn't worry about it because I knew it wouldn't hurt it. I do wipe it off, but it is waterproof. I wouldn't take it swimming though. So you want to master your camera settings. You want to learn the exposure triangle. And if you've been one of my students, you've seen this before. I talk about aperture, shutter speed, and ISO, and that controls the motion, light, and depth of focus or sharpness in your images. And so I'm going to show you that triangle, that exposure triangle. It's a bright slide. So the exposure triangle has 3 sides to it. It's sort of like a 3-way seesaw, if you can imagine that. And you have aperture, ISO, and shutter speed. Your aperture is the opening of the lens. It opens and closes, and those numbers are a fraction. So if you see at the top left, it says f1.4, and at the bottom left, it says f32. That's just a general range. Some lenses are different than that. But that's your aperture. That controls how much light goes into your lens. And then the ISO is the sensitivity of your camera to light. And the range on here, it shows ISO 50 to 25,600. I don't like to use 25,600 because it makes your film, did you hear that? Boy, 25,600 ISO is super sensitive to light, and it will give you a fast shutter speed, which is great. But then when you go in to look at your pictures, the pictures are in film words, they would say grainy. In digital words, they say noisy. So you want to keep your ISO as low as you can. but you don't always get to choose the super low ISOs. It just depends on how much light there is. And then the shutter speed is what determines the sharpness of your pictures. If you're photographing and everything's in focus and you have a super slow shutter speed and your subject moves, it's going to be blurry. So you can have a sharp subject, but if it's moving and your shutter speed's too slow, it's going to be blurry. And most cameras, it says 1/4 second. These cameras that we have now, you can leave them open for minutes and hours, actually, if you do the, if you put your camera on bulb and run your picture for a long time, like if you're doing star trails or night photography, or just want that effect of something being semi-abstract due to motion. And the shutter speeds can go up to 8,000th of a second. I think they might even be faster now. Some of the new cameras go even faster than 8,000th of a second. But anyway, if you're shooting in manual mode, you can control all 3 parts of that exposure triangle, and that determines the results of your pictures. So in this picture, we've got some action. We've got 2 red-winged blackbirds sparring, and they're going up in the air. One's got his foot out, and the other one's got his beak out. They're sparring, and they're, for the most part, they're very sharp. Their eyes are sharp. Their tails are sharp. Their feet. The only thing that shows a little bit of blur is the wing on the one on the left. Well, both of them actually have a little bit of blur in the wings. And here are my camera settings. Even at a 3200th of a second, you've got some blur. And I think it's not necessarily from the shutter speed, but I think at f5, that means the lens is wide open and you don't have a lot of depth of focus from front to back. The ISO is 800, which is sort of medium. And this is with one of my Canon cameras with a 500mm lens. And I did crop a little bit, not a lot, but a little bit. So mastering camera settings. You want to practice and learn how to isolate your subject from the background, which helps make your subject distinct. You want to intentionally freeze or blur the subject's movement, and that's usually with your shutter speed. And you also want to control your digital noise. That's the ISO. So this example, I was shooting with a long lens, and these 2 birds were having a little discussion, and all of a sudden they started sparring, and the one decided he was leaving and the other was grabbing him as he was leaving. So I had a fast shutter speed, thankfully, and I was able to freeze that action. But I had too much lens for what was going on. The wings were going out. And so it's just an example of capturing something that you like, but maybe you don't like it because it got cropped, too tightly. This picture is a turkey, and she is she has just taken a dirt bath, and then they wallow around in the sand and the dirt, and they push dirt all around under their wings and under their legs and all that. And when she stands up, she shakes off like a dog, and dirt flies everywhere. You can see the dirt clod off on the right-hand side of the picture coming off of her. It's pretty funny, but knowing and expecting that, it's part of knowing animal behavior and expecting something to happen. And this is what we get. Here's another fast action picture. I think on this one, I was at 3200th. I like to have at least 2500th of a second for my shutter speed, and I'll adjust my aperture and my ISO to make that happen. And so the cardinal just happened to be coming in, and right behind him came in the green jay. And so it's just one of those things. I was in the right place at the right time, had my camera set up with a tripod, and I captured the red bird and the green bird, the same picture. So you want to use natural light whenever possible. I don't use flash very often, and I do use flash, and I say, well, it's available if it's in my camera bag, right? So anyway, most of the time though, I use just natural light, what we're given. And so you want to learn about lighting at the different times of day and the various weather conditions. Early and late hours usually provide soft, warm light, while overcast weather, like we've had for the past couple of weeks, makes for even light without shadows. And sometimes there's not enough light to make it real easy to photograph, but I do like shooting in overcast light. This was taken in the evening after the sun went down, and there was just enough light that there was a catch light in this great kiskadee eye. He was sitting on a log that sits in the pond at the Laguna Seca Ranch. And the next picture is of some deer. It's not from the same night, but it's the same location. You can see that log in the bottom of the frame, and the bucks come in. Sometimes the does come in first. That's what usually happens. And by the time the bucks decide to come in, there's usually a lot less light. But here on that evening, I had just enough light where I had a good enough shutter speed to make them come out sharp. Before the sun comes up, if you're there 30 minutes to 20 minutes before the sun rises, you're going to get silhouettes. If I wanted to get details on these cranes, I would have to do a super long exposure. And you can see the fourth bird in this lineup of birds is moving. And if he had been on a slower shutter speed, he was going to be a blur. So what I did was I exposed for the color of the water with the sunrise light coming up. And so you have to choose what you want. If I really wanted to get the details of the cranes, I was either going to have to go for a longer exposure or a higher ISO. And I just love the rich colors. So I kept my ISO pretty far down and had a medium shutter speed and just let them be mostly silhouettes. Here I'm photographing in the rain, and I've got a pair of crested caracaras. They're wet, so they've got punk rock hairdos, and they are a pair, and what they're doing is looking around and claiming that part of the field as their own, and that's what that territorial head toss is. It represents the bird saying, this is mine. And when they do that head toss, they could be talking about the field, or they could be talking about food or a perch, or the bird next to him. This is my mate, you can't have it. This weekend I was at the ranch, and we had a black vulture and a caracara sitting side by side, and they did something called allo preening. They were preening each other. And the caracara was on my right, and the black vulture was on my left. And all of a sudden, and I was doing a video because it was really cool to see. And all of a sudden, out of nowhere comes the mate of the black vulture, and it came and it hit that caracara on the back and threw him off the perch. So that was unexpected, but I was videotaping because I wanted to get that allo preening, the two different birds, two different species preening each other. Here I'm photographing in the actual rain. This is a Harris's hawk, and I just kept my eye on him. I did a vertical composition because the bird is a vertical subject pretty much of the time. They're vertical because they're very alert and upright. And I knew that when he got wet enough, he would shake off. And I just sat there and watched and waited. And as soon as he started, I laid into the shutter and have a whole series. But this is the best one from that series. Here I'm photographing at night, and Paul Denman was with me. Some of you know Paul. He's one of our members, and it was so cold that night, and it was a lunar eclipse, and I had my car, well, my truck parked right next to where I was shooting. I had my tripod, big heavy tripod, my 600mm lens. I don't own those anymore. They're owned by folks in this room. But anyway, I was photographing, and it was so cold. I was shivering. I had one coat. I didn't have lots of layers. And so what I was doing was taking multiple exposures, but on one, it's not a piece of film, but one on one exposure. So what happens is you set up the camera to take more than one exposure. I set it for 9. I think I got 9. Yeah, I got 9. And so every minute or so, I would just slightly move my camera angle so that I would make a spiral. And I had no idea what it was going to look like because I'm just shooting in the dark and not seeing each picture as it comes out. And on that 9th exposure, the last one with the little sliver there, on that exposure, I pressed the shutter and I heard ka-clunk. My battery died. And I had no idea until I got home that night whether I got a picture or not. So, you know, be prepared. And if you're going to do something, especially at night, make sure you have extra batteries, extra cards. I should have checked my battery before I started this, but it was over. The lunar eclipse was almost over and my photos were over for the night. I had used up my batteries. So anyway, I like to shoot at night. You just have to be a little bit more prepared. So learning about composition, moving on to that, I'm going to say I use the rule of thirds as a guideline, not a rule, not a hard, fast rule, but a guideline for composing. I like to look for visually appealing images, and it's usually, but not always, it usually means that you're going to be composing with the main subject off center. If you take a picture and put your subject in the middle every time, your pictures are going to look the same and they'll get stagnant over time. You'll just see the same thing over and over and over in the middle. Now, some people like to shoot with them in the middle and then crop later. I was brought up in film and we didn't have film to waste because you only had 24 by 36 millimeter piece of film. And if you crop afterwards, you have less left. So I've always been taught to compose the way you want it, try and make the camera try and make the picture as perfect as you can in camera so that you don't have to do a lot afterwards. So one of the things I like is upside down birds facing downward. The diagonal of this Oriole is very pleasing because your eye, I think it will start at the tail and go down to the eye. Some people might start at the eye and go up the tail, but we do read from top left to bottom right when we're reading. We start at the top of the page and go down and to the right. So when I look at this, I go down the tail and stop at the eye and the beak. I just like that composition. Here's another one. This is an oripendula, and that's a bird that I photographed in Costa Rica. So that's not a South Texas bird. It's the same thing, just a bigger bird and slightly different angle. Top left going toward the bottom right. And if I were in the field and the bird was going from top right to bottom left, it might look backwards. So you have to decide. You can flip it in the computer, but you can't change the bird while you're there. So sometimes I'll flip pictures, but those birds were both photographed that way. Here's a bird flying from from bottom right to top left. And I left the bananas in the picture. I didn't show the whole bunch because I really wanted people to focus on the bird when they see this picture. And I like this composition because the bird itself makes a backwards S. If you start at the beak and go down to the right, he does make sort of a soft S and his wings sort of complement that. I guess I could flip that one, and I didn't do that for the slideshow, but that's something you always have the opportunity to do later. This one, I think, could have been a lot better, but I caught it and then it was gone. I like to have more room in front of the subject and less behind it. And so when you're looking at this cardinal, he's a red bird on a green cactus heart-shaped, and I use that for Valentine's Day. And if I could have made this better, what I would have done was move the camera over a little bit to the right so I'd have less room behind the bird and more in front of him. So that's my own critique on my own photo. This woodpecker is flying from left to right. We read from left to right. I could probably turn it around and it would be a pleasing composition as well. He was taking off from that perch. I don't know, I could leave that perch out, but I didn't. Here's where I break the rule. This bird is smack in the middle. And this is what I do to see if something is bullseyed. I take an imaginary pen and make an X through the picture, starting at each corner and going to the opposite corner down below. So I go from top left to bottom right and top right to bottom left. And that bird is right smack in the middle. Okay, is it all right? I think it is. It's a very symmetrical bird. It's a turkey and it's got its wings out. And I think it's okay. I could have cropped from the top and had less background, but right now that bird is smack in the middle And you have to decide if that's the way you like it or not. It's very subjective. Here's another one that's smack in the middle. And I don't think I would change anything on this one. I like the 4 eyes and they're almost perfectly in the middle. If I was getting nitpicky, I might take something off of the top because there, if you look in the top left, there's a blue bit of color. And I don't know, is it distracting or not? It sort of ties into the frog because the frog is in the shade. So that's why you've got the blue and the water on the frog. So I left it. In learning about composition, I think you should check both the background and the edges in your viewfinder before pressing the shutter. You might be surprised at what distractions you discover. Now, I was up in Georgetown when I did this program, and I talked to them a little bit about border control or border patrol. So starting in the corners and going around the picture looking is what I call border patrol, border control, either one. I've got a series of 2 pictures here. This is a great kiskadee, and he's being very greedy. He wants as many berries as he can eat. And so he picked up 2, but he couldn't keep them both. So that was sort of one of those lucky shots, right? I laugh because, you know, here he is trying to get both berries and he tried to juggle them and one fell out. Same thing here. You know, it's action. And if you look at my corners, there's nothing in the corners. There's nothing along the edges that distract. You know, the bird's perch goes out of the frame on the left side, but I think that's okay because the Pyrrholoxia on the left is approaching the perch and the thrasher, the curve-billed thrasher is giving him the evil eye. It's like, no, this is my perch. And the polite Pyrrholoxia says, I'm sorry. And by putting out the wings and flaring the tail, I think that holds the composition together. I like the composition on this one because there is a little bit of room on the back side of the cardinal, but his tail is down there. And if you go up his tail and up to the top of his head where he's got his nice crest, he's got his wings pointing toward the cactus. He's on the tuna. He's got 1 foot balanced. It's like he's just landing and he's catching his balance. And so I feel the tension in that. I like the way this composition works. And actually, what was even more special about it, the sun was going down and the sun had gone almost below the horizon. It was coming up the cactus. The shadows were coming up the cactus. So only the bird and the tips of those cactus fruits are in sun. The rest of it's in shadow. The aloe are blooming. Has anybody seen aloe blooming right now? Everybody, right? Yeah. It's everywhere. We grow aloe here. We're one of the aloe capitals of the world. And so I grow them in my yard. And when I go to the ranch, I'll bring the aloe with me. And sometimes you get lucky and get a pretty bird on the aloe. Here's a pair of golden-fronted woodpeckers. When you look at this picture, there's stuff coming in from the bottom of the picture. If you look in all the corners, the only stuff that's sticking into the picture from the bottom. Does that bother anybody? No, it's grass and it's a tree trunk. And so that looks normal and feels normal when you look at that. And this is the only shot I have of that pair of woodpeckers like this. She just happened to look up and he happened to look out and her beak is pointing toward him and his is arced over her. And in my personal preference, I probably wouldn't like that stick, that perch, that little stick that's sticking out that he's standing on to be so close to her beak, but it sort of ties it in. Your eye follows through and the composition keeps you in the picture. Sometimes you go down and look at the grass. Okay, well, there's nothing happening there and it points you back up to the birds. So some of you know about this bird. I call him Darth Vader. It's a bronzed cowbird. And he is a show-off. He's looking for a mate. There's a female down below in the grass, and she's walking around eating, and he gets all excited. Oh, there's a girl there. I'm going to show off for her. And he gets so excited, and he starts quivering, and he gets so fast with his quivering with his wings that he just starts levitating, and he floats up above her, and he's looking down at her, and she's eating. She's not paying any attention. Sort of a funny story. But if you look at the picture, there's nothing in any of the corners or along the edges. Sometimes we get lucky. Sometimes, I mean, you never know when it's going to happen. You know, they're courting and that he's going to do it. But so many times it's behind a branch. So I was really happy for this one. This was in my backyard. The flowers were blooming on the trees, and this common ground dove just happened to go up there, and they're usually ground birds, so you don't see them up high. So that was just one of those lucky shots. Just happened to get it. There again, we have the aloe. This is a black crested titmouse. Now in this case, the corners and the edges, they're all full of stuff. Is it bothersome? I could have left it, I could have made the bird very small in the frame and made it a more open composition, but I wanted to show the bird. So I went ahead and got real close and tight on this one. See, that's the whole scene. And if you can imagine the titmouse in that spot, it would be very small in the frame. So I like the oriole in the frame, but the titmouse, I think it needed to be cropped. This is a fun part of the show for me because I like talking about in the field, trees, rocks, or a kayak or a float tube in the water can help you blend and hide from your subjects. If you move slowly and quietly, you can avoid startling the wildlife, and you should wear muted colors that blend. So this is me on the side of a pond, and I had the ranch owner take a picture of me, and you can see me, and you know, well, you don't know that it's me, but it is. But I'm under a piece of fabric, and I'm wearing a camouflage outfit. And I blend in. If the landowner were to walk away, there would be birds right there in front of me, and they wouldn't know or see me. They might know that something's there, but it's not going to look like the human form. When we go walking around, animals see our legs and they see our arms moving around. If you're in a blob kind of an outfit of camouflage, you're not going to look like a human. So that's what I like to do when I'm out in the field, not in a blind. Here I am in a kayak, and this is my Hobie. It's a sit on top. And what I like about the Hobie is that it has pedals. So I'm pedaling, that's what powers me. And my left hand, you can see, is on the control for the rudder. So I can hold my camera in my hands and rest it on my knees and aim anywhere. I control if I'm moving or not with my feet. And if I need to if I need to turn one way or the other, I can just move with my rudder control on my hand. So I like using that. And I did put photo courtesy of Elaine Pruden because she's the person who was helping me learn about photographing from a kayak. She's not necessarily a photographer, but she loves kayaking, and she taught me a lot about kayak safety. This is another one of my rigs. It's a truck tire, and I'm using it as a float tube. It's a truck tire from the big 18-wheeler trucks, and it just filled up with air. And then I put a piece of plywood with holes cut in it and a PVC pipe across the top, and then a cushion for my camera. You can also put like a Wimberley head or something like that, attach it to the plywood. And then what I do is get that covered up, and now it's a camo, and I can take it into the water and the birds can't see the human form. This is me going in. This is me getting out there. And I did put the fabric behind me, but if it gets in the water, it's going to get wet, and it's going to sort of drag you down. So as long as you're going in the direction toward the subjects that you're aiming at, they can't see me behind that wall of camouflage material. And if you're going to go in deep water, use flippers, because you don't want to get stuck out there with all this stuff and not have a way to get back to shore. But this was a very shallow pond. Okay, so working from a permanent or portable blind provides cover for you and your camera. You want to work slowly and quietly, though, just like when you're out in the field, especially when you're with others. You don't want to cause a disturbance. And when I take people in the blind with me, a lot of times, well, if they're a group and they know each other, sometimes they get a real casual and start talking and all that. The birds at the ranch are pretty acclimated, But when they start talking too much or laughing and carrying on, it does interfere with what's going on. So I try and keep talking and movement to a minimum. So this is one of the blinds at the Laguna Seca Ranch. And this is what it looks like when everybody's ready to shoot. This is what it looks like from the inside. Here's a group that I just did last month, the Olympus workshop that I did. This is my friend Charles Lawrence. I have helped him on his ranch, which is up in Falfurrias, and we were trying different photo blinds. This one is a portable duck blind. It's just like sort of like a big bathtub, and you dig a hole and you put it in there and then you cover it up. And so this is what it looks like when he's shooting. And from the inside, it looks like that. This is me. This is not really a blind. This is just protection. Paul Denman was my assistant or helper. He was my spotter. Debbie Thomas built this frame for me out of 2x4s and plexiglass and cut a hole in the plexiglass so that my lens could go through it and I could take pictures of the snake without being real close to it. That's a 16 to 35 millimeter lens, so it's really close. And I also had my macro lens. And at one point I thought, oh, you know what? I'd like to switch to my 180 macro lens. And I pulled the camera out to change lenses and I saw that snake and I said, no, I'm not going to do that. I changed my mind. Yeah. So this is the photo that I was working on with that lens. When I'm photographing snakes, I tell people the thing that you want when you're doing a photo of a rattlesnake is that you want the eye, hopefully the tongue, and hopefully the rattle. You want those three things in your composition, and you want those in focus if possible. So post-processing techniques, I'm not going to go into any depth on this because that's another whole program or workshop. You want to use apps such as Adobe Lightroom or Photoshop to enhance your colors, contrast, and sharpness, but you want to avoid over-editing that alters the appearance of your subjects. And so I know that this looks super bright, but I think it's the projector, not so much my color, because when you look at my actual laptop, you can see that it's not as dramatic. So the projector may make these photos look oversaturated, but I try to keep things looking as natural as possible. I know it's very easy to overprocess images, and that's something that I always try and work with when I'm working with students to not do that. And then as far as education and conservation goes, you want to educate yourself and others, especially youths. They're our future. We want to talk about nature conservation and teach, volunteer, donate, whatever works for you to help support those efforts. And so this is Simon Fontenot. He's one of my young students. He's 17. And he went to the ranch with me. He's waited 2 years to go with me to the ranch, and he was so excited. And so I took this picture of him while he was photographing, and I said, "Hey, Simon, look." And he looked and he saw my camera, so he smiled. And what he was doing was taking a picture of a female cardinal in the water. So I circled his cameras to tell you to look, but here's the picture that he was taking at the moment. He was learning to get low, get the reflection, and have everything in the right amount of focus and depth of field. And then ethical considerations in sharing. So this is my main final point, is that you want to get permission before sharing photos or of private wildlife areas and avoid geotagging precise spots of vulnerable species to prevent disturbance or poaching. It's not only true for birds, but mammals. It's just true in general. You don't want to just be giving out information to everyone because you don't know who's going to see that when you're very public with your posts. So this photo is done by David Welling, and it's a photograph, and it looks overprocessed. Again, it's not. This is a photo that David Welling took back in the 2000 photo contest down here. It didn't win anything, and it's got such meaning and I don't know, it means so much because it was something that you just can't duplicate. He was photographing green jays and a snake, the rattlesnake came and it just grabbed the green jay by the back of the head. And he was fast enough to capture it. And I was very disappointed that it didn't win anything. But, you know, it's really funny because 20 years later, actually more than 20 years later, he put this photo in another contest and it won first grand prize. So I asked him for permission, and that's my whole point here is if you share anything, whether it's yours or not, you want to get permission from the person who created the image or the art or whatever it is. And would you like to see a few more photos? Yes? Okay, I'll show a few. And I won't go, I've already been talking for almost an hour, so I don't want to go too long, but I'm just going to go through some of the pictures that have been highlights for me. These are all, well, I don't know if they're all in the valley. I'll tell you if they're not. This was in Costa Rica. They call this the Jesus Christ lizard because it runs across the water. He walks on water is what they say. He's so fast that he just runs across the water. Yeah, all of these have been taken in the valley. My favorite green jays. Green jays are curious, so they look everywhere. I had put some food under there for a woodpecker because I know woodpeckers will hang from a perch, and he watched me do it and then he went to inspect. This is one of those things. It just it is slightly set up. One of my friends said, Ruth, I just found a road-killed coral snake. Would you like it? And I was like, yeah, I'm going to do raptors in the morning. And so I brought the snake out, put it out, and the juvenile Harris's hawk came and took it. And I just happened to be in the right place at the right time and have the right settings. I mean, because you can't predict when it's going to happen or what's going to happen. Sometimes, like I said before, you can have too much lens by having a long lens, but the interaction, I think, is, you know, you see the two faces and that claw between them. It just, you know, it's one of those serendipitous moments. This one was sort of funny. It looks like they're doing the hokey pokey. What I like about this photograph is it's a slow shutter speed, but the green jay hovered long enough, sort of like a hummingbird, and his wings were flying like crazy. And the beak, the toes, and the tail are all sharp. It's just the wings are moving. This one I call tiptoeing. He was tiptoeing across a perch that was meant for a warbler. And you know, like I said, the green jays are really curious and they have to crash the party and check out everything. And he saw me put that perch up, so he had to go check it out. And his back foot is actually on the top part of that perch, but he's so heavy that it put it down and it put it below the bottom one. But I like the balance and the position of the wings and tail and just the whole way it worked. This is one of my favorite whitetail hawk pictures. I have all kinds of pictures of whitetail hawks, but this one is probably my favorite because it's got the rufous color on the wings, the white tail, and it's all flared out. It's just nice pose. There's an underside picture of the same bird. He was circling, so I got him both ways. Mockingbird. The olive sparrow is an endemic. You won't find that anywhere else in the US. And it's a ground bird. It hangs out down on the ground. And if you look up olive sparrow in the field guides, you won't see that yellow on the wing. I know it's there, so I'm always looking for the little yellow spot on the olive sparrow's wing. And this picture showed that. Great kiskadee with the berries. They love the red berries. This is another old favorite of mine. This little fawn had never been to the pond before. You could tell because he was very nervous and apprehensive about going in the water. And his mama encouraged him and licked him to make him feel comfortable. Everybody likes the cactus tunas, and that's what this cardinal is doing. She's landing and trying to grab a piece of that. Kiskadee playing with its food. There's a reason for that. They will eat just about anything they can catch. And what they do is they throw it up in the air and munch on it when it comes down and throw it up in the air and munch on it. And what they're doing is trying to mash it so that it won't bite them or sting them as it's going down when they eat it. There's another white-tailed hawk. And this bird just landed next to the caracara and took the food right out of his beak. And the caracara was just sort of like, really? Okay. It's like the playground bully. Two caracaras tussling, coming in for a landing. This one I think most of you've seen before, but it's one of my favorite pictures, and it's a nice way to end the program. It's just, I put some Yopon out in front of the photo blind, and the woodpecker came in, the evening light just hit right. You see the red eye, and it matches the red berry in his beak. And I'd like to thank you.